Okay, get ready to really use those brain muscles because today we're going deep, deep, deep into the world of philosophy with Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Yeah, you send over these excerpts, and wow, this text, it's like famous for being a real brain twister.
It's true.
But the insights, I think it's going to be worth it.
Oh, absolutely.
What we're going to try to do today is, instead of turning you into Hegel experts, just give you a good, solid framework for wrapping your head around his main ideas and why they still matter, even today.
Well, and what's so fascinating about Hegel is he's not just trying to create like another philosophical system, you know. He's really trying to lay out a map of the entire journey of how our minds work, how we go from just basic awareness to what he calls science, which is like a complete and total understanding of reality itself.
So like a roadmap for how our minds evolve, not just like one person, but like all of humanity.
Oh, yeah.
Through history.
Precisely, like the whole enchilada. He uses this term spirit to kind of describe this collective consciousness, this thing that drives us towards knowledge.
Oh, okay, I see.
And his phenomenology, it's like this giant chronicle of spirit's journey through time.
Okay. And one thing I noticed in the foreword, which we're also looking at, Hegel really emphasizes how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
So like the phenomenology isn't just a standalone book. It's like one piece of a much larger puzzle, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And also he talks about how this journey of consciousness, it's not linear. It's not just like ABC. There's this constant struggle, this clash of ideas that kind of pushes spirit forward.
Exactly, and he calls that negation, right?
Okay.
Where you have these two opposing concepts and they're kind of battling it out.
Yeah.
And from that tension, from that seeming contradiction, a new understanding kind of pops out, something more comprehensive than what came before. It's like think about, you know, revolution in history. That's like a negation of the old way of doing things. And from that, you get a totally new form of government.
So it's not about one idea winning and the other one losing,
Yeah.
but something new being born out of that conflict.
Yeah. It's this process of, a synthesis, you know, where something totally new comes out of that struggle. And this happens again and again and again. And it pushes spirit towards what he calls absolute knowledge.
Absolute knowledge. And that is where nothing remains unexplained. Even the messy parts, the stuff that seems contradictory, it all has its place in the grand scheme of things.
It all fits together, yeah.
But I also noticed in the foreword, Hegel, he warns us. He's like, hey, this journey, this is not a walk in the park. He even uses the words seriousness, anguish, and patient effort.
Right. It's not for the faint of heart, right? This is a real, it takes some work to really wrap your head around this stuff.
So are we up for it?
I think so.
Are you ready to embark on this journey?
I am, yeah. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So where do we begin? Well, Hegel starts with consciousness, our most basic sensory experience of the world. Seems straightforward enough, right?
It seems that way, but there's a catch, right? As Hegel points out, our senses can be a little tricky, a little deceptive.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, think about color, like, the color red. You look at an apple, it might look bright red outside on a sunny day.
Right.
But then you look at that same apple at dusk, it might look almost purple.
Yeah, that's true.
Because our senses, they don't give us this kind of fixed, unchanging view of the world. They're constantly shifting. They're limited.
So how do we move beyond this constantly changing landscape of sensory data?
Well, that leads us to the next stage, which is self-consciousness.
Okay.
And this is where we realize that we are the ones doing the experiencing, that there's this self that's distinct from all the objects that we're perceiving out there in the world.
So it's like when a baby first recognizes themselves in the mirror.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like, oh, that's me. It's a big change.
It's a profound shift. You go from just being aware to being aware that you are aware.
This is where we become self-aware. We become individuals, conscious of our own existence. And I think this is what sets the stage for one of Hegel's most famous ideas, the master-slave dialectic.
Right.
And the foreword actually has a really good, concise explanation of this.
Yeah, it's surprisingly clear, especially for Hegel.
Right.
He asks us to imagine these two self-conscious beings. They meet for the first time. Each one, they want recognition from the other.
Okay.
Like, hey, acknowledge that I exist, that I'm an independent being. And of course, this immediately leads to conflict. Like, who's in charge here? Who's going to be the top dog?
It's like two people going for the same job, and each one needs to prove that they're better.
Exactly. It's a struggle for dominance, this need to be recognized as superior.
Okay, so we've got this battle going on, but this can't go on forever, right? Someone's going to come out on top.
Right, exactly. Eventually, one emerges as what Hegel calls the master, and the other becomes the slave. But and this is one of the things that makes Hegel so fascinating. There's a twist. The slave, through their labor, through their interaction with the material world, they actually develop a deeper understanding of reality than the master.
Wait, so the one who's being oppressed, they end up with a better grasp of things. How does that work? You'd think the one in control would have the upper hand?
That's what's so counterintuitive about it. But think of it this way. The master, they're focused on being served, right? They're caught in this cycle of immediate gratification. The world is just there to satisfy their needs. But the slave, they're forced to engage the world on a much deeper level. They're working with their hands, they're shaping materials, they're learning how things actually work. They gain this practical, intimate knowledge that the master, detached and served, never really acquires.
So even in oppression, even when someone's being controlled, there's a form of knowledge being generated.
Absolutely.
There's this deeper understanding of the world that's emerging.
That's the irony of the whole situation.
That's such a powerful idea.
Yeah.
Okay, but where do we go from here? We've moved beyond basic awareness. We see ourselves as individuals. But how do we then make sense of the world around us? Is it just about the raw data we get from our senses?
Right.
Or is there a role for reason, for our minds to play in all of this? So we've seen how tricky our senses can be and how this struggle for recognition, it can actually lead to a deeper understanding of the world, even for the one who's being, put in that subservient position.
Yeah.
But what about reason? Where does reason fit into all of this? Can't we just, think our way to a complete picture of reality?
Well, that's the next stage in the journey that Hegel wants to take us on, right? He's challenging this very common sense idea that we can just, gather up facts like, doing a geometry problem and arrive at the truth about the world.
So you're saying there's a difference between knowing the what and understanding the why.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I might know that, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I actually understand, the chemical process.
Exactly, yeah. You've got it. And Hegel, he calls this kind of thinking, just collecting facts and applying logic, he calls it understanding. And sections 41 and 42, which you sent over, really get into this.
Okay.
He says, it's like someone who's memorized a bunch of mathematical formulas but doesn't actually get what they mean, right?
Okay.
They can solve the equation, but they're missing something deeper.
So what's the alternative? If just applying logic isn't enough, how do we get beyond this limited understanding?
Well, this is where Hegel introduces this idea of observing reason. And this is where we try to make sense of the world through observation, right? By looking at things carefully, categorizing them, putting them in boxes.
Right.
But of course, Hegel, being Hegel, he shows how even this approach has its limits.
And he uses that example of phrenology, where people would try to feel the bumps on your skull.
Oh, right, yeah.
And determine you're good at math or you're going to be a criminal.
Right, they're trying to link physical traits to really complex inner states, right?
Yeah.
And of course, Hegel, he points out how absurd this is. He even jokes, if we look at the skull of a murderer, we should see these bumps that reveal their criminal tendencies, right? He's using humor here, but he's making a really serious point, which is that there's more to understanding ourselves in the world than just these outward appearances, than just putting things into neat little categories.
It's like judging a book by its cover.
Right? Yeah.
You can't really know what's going on inside.
Exactly.
The depth and complexity just from some superficial external thing.
Right. And Hegel wants us to dig deeper, right? To move beyond these really simplistic explanations. So we've seen that pure reason has its limits.
Right.
Observing the world, even that has its limits. So where do we go from here?
Right. Where do we go?
And this is where Hegel's concept of the ethical order comes into play.
Okay, this sounds interesting. What is this ethical order? And how does that help us make sense of things?
Yeah. Well, sections 472, 473, 480, those give us a little clue here.
Okay.
For Hegel, the ethical order isn't about our personal opinions, right? Or just whatever feels right to us in the moment. It's about recognizing that we exist as self-conscious beings within a larger social fabric.
Okay.
Right? There's this set of values, these customs that we share. And it shapes our understanding of right and wrong, good and bad.
So it's kind of like this unwritten agreement, this like shared understanding.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
That's what kind of holds society together.
Yeah, exactly. Like, think about, the ancient Greek polis,
Okay.
right?
Oh.
There was this really strong sense of community. Everyone understood what it meant to be a citizen, what the rules were.
Right.
But of course, even this ethical order, as much as it seems stable, it faces its own challenges.
Of course, there are going to be challenges. What kind of challenges?
Well, remember that master-slave dialectic we talked about? That tension between what an individual wants and their need to be recognized by others?
Yes.
Well, that same tension, it pops up again here, between the individual and this ethical order.
Okay.
Hegel uses this example of two brothers, and they inherit a kingdom.
Okay.
And their desires, their individual ambitions, those clash with the established order.
Right.
And it creates this conflict, and it threatens to disrupt the whole system.
So even within a society, even if it seems stable on the outside, you still have this inherent tension between what individuals want and the need for some kind of order, some kind of shared values.
Absolutely, yeah. And for Hegel, this tension, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? He sees it as an engine of progress, as something that pushes spirit forward. But it also raises this crucial question.
What's that?
If reason, if even the ethical order itself has these limits, are we just left adrift?
Yeah.
Is there something more? Is there something more that we should be striving for?
So we've gone from the limits of our senses to all the complexities of reason, and then even the ethical dilemmas that come up, living in society with other people.
And it feels like with Hegel, every time you think you've got a grip on something solid, he pulls the rug out from under you. And there's always more to think about, deeper layers. So where do we go from here? Is there any solid ground in this whole search for, true understanding? That's a great question. And it can feel, a little like a roller coaster, right? This constant going back to the drawing board, questioning what we thought we knew. But Hegel's not trying to leave us like lost at sea. He's showing us that even when we come up against these limits, there's still this longing for something more, right? This need to find meaning and purpose that goes beyond just like pure logic.
Right.
Or even the social structures that we live in.
Yeah, and this is where those excerpts you sent over about religion and art, those really come in. I mean, they offer this glimpse into something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
And those sections like 684, 692, 694, 701, 710, they really get into this.
Right.
I was really struck by how Hegel looks at different religions, throughout history as representing these different stages in spirit's development.
It's like humanity's trying to figure this out as we go along.
Right. So he sees these early religions, the ones that focus so much on nature.
Right.
And these powerful external forces.
Right.
As kind of like humanity's first attempt to understand this idea of the infinite.
Yeah, like we're reaching for something,
right?
But we don't quite have the tools yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Like the pyramids of Egypt. Amazing. You look at them, you're just like, wow. Like how did they even,
Right.
It represents this striving for something beyond just everyday experience.
Right.
But it's still bound to that material world.
They're very much rooted in this world, yeah.
Yeah. It's like humanity's reaching for something just beyond its grasp.
Right.
With whatever they had at the time.
With the tools that they had, yeah.
Right. Okay, so then you've got art.
Yeah.
And Hegel sees this as like a turning point.
Okay. How so?
So instead of these imposing structures like pyramids, art offers something a little more nuanced.
Okay.
A little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Inspired.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to represent spirit, but in a different way.
Okay.
It's like, I don't know, think about Greek sculpture.
Right.
And how they took something like the divine.
Right.
And they're representing it in human form.
Right. It's becoming more relatable somehow.
Yeah. It's like
right.
through art, this abstract concept of spirit.
Yeah.
It's becoming more tangible, more connected to like what it means to be human.
Right. It's like it's being kind of filtered through this human experience.
Yes, exactly. But even art, for Hegel, it still has its limitations.
Okay.
Because it's still bound to that physical form.
Right. Whether it's paint on a canvas or a sculpture made of marble.
Exactly. Yeah.
It can only go so far.
Right. So art is a leap forward,
yeah,
but it's not the final destination.
Right.
Okay, so this brings us to absolute knowing.
Okay.
This monumental and kind of intimidating idea.
Yeah, it's Hegel's like big kahuna,
Yes.
right? Like what's it all about in the end?
Right. And you mentioned section 790 and 808.
Yeah,
Like, those give us some clues.
they do.
But is it even possible? Can we put this idea into words?
Well, it's definitely one of the toughest things to wrap your head around in all of Hegel.
Right.
Like imagine trying to grasp like the entire journey of consciousness
Right.
from the very beginning, like the first spark of awareness
Yeah.
to like the most complex thoughts you can have. And not just like you, but like everybody, all of history, all at once.
Wow. Yeah.
That's kind of what absolute knowing is getting at. It's not about just knowing a lot of facts and figures,
Right.
but really grasping how everything fits together.
So it's not like a destination on a map.
Okay.
It's
No.
it's more like a process.
Yes.
This constant expansion of how you understand things.
Yeah, like seeing the whole picture kind of coming into focus.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So
Oh.
you're always on the journey. There's no point where you arrive and you're like, I've got it. I understand everything.
Yeah, it's not like climbing to the top of the mountain
Right.
and then you're done, right?
Right.
It's more like this ongoing process of discovery.
But what does it mean for like you and me, like right here, right now? Like, what does absolute knowing even look like?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
Hegel might say that absolute knowing isn't some set of instructions for how to live your life. It's more like a perspective.
Okay.
It's about understanding that our senses have limits.
Right.
That simple explanations, they're usually not the whole story.
Right.
And that the world is messy and complicated.
Right.
But that's okay.
So it's less about getting like the right answer and more about just being on the journey.
Yeah, the journey of trying to understand, constantly asking questions, trying to get a deeper grasp
Yeah.
of what's going on.
Okay, so embrace the struggle. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, Hegel would say that the real value is not about reaching some endpoint,
Okay.
but it's about how we grow and what we discover about ourselves along the way.
Wow. Wrestling with these ideas.
Yeah.
Challenging what we believe.
That's how we grow.
Yeah. That's how we play our own little part in this whole unfolding of spirit.
That's what he would say, yeah.
This has been quite the journey,
It has.
to say the least.
It's a wild ride with Hegel.
Hegel gives us a lot to think about. Any final thoughts for our listeners out there as they continue to explore these ideas?
I would just say don't get discouraged if it's hard. Don't worry if you feel a little lost sometimes, because remember, Hegel himself said this takes seriousness, anguish, and patient effort. But it's in that wrestling, that willingness to really try to grasp these really complex ideas that we really grow and expand how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
Beautifully said. This deep dive into Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit has been challenging, it's been inspiring, and hopefully it's given you some new ways of looking at the world and your place in it. And remember, this is just the beginning. The journey of consciousness, it doesn't end here. We're all in this together. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep those minds open. Keep those questions coming.